Alright, so recently it was brought to my attention that Niantic was inexplicably removing Pokéstops and Gyms from certain areas. Like, none of these Pokéstops were in private residential property, or it was a Pokéstop that was non-existent. Like, none of these factors were actually there. So it was really odd that Niantic was removing Pokéstops and Gyms, and I really did not know exactly why something like this was happening, but a lot of players were suspecting that it had something to do with the AR mapping tasks that some Pokéstops will actually have. But recently on Twitter, it was actually kind of confirmed that one user who had a couple of Pokéstops near his house was actually seeing his Pokéstops get removed even though they were legitimate Pokéstops. And he pointed out that it had to do with the AR mapping tasks, considering that for a lot of players, they would drive up to the Pokéstop and then they would do the AR mapping tasks incorrectly and then just go about their day. And the theory is that because of this, these Pokéstops were eventually removed. Of course, he did have them restored by filing a complaint with Niantic support, so that's a good thing. But the fact that this is actually something that could happen is something that we need to address. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about in today's video. Let's roll the intro and get right into it. How's it going, everyone? It's me, it's Count here with a brand new Pokemon Go video, and today I wanted to talk about something a little bit pressing, considering that for Pokéstops and Gyms, it's always a very negative thing if you see any of them get removed. Of course, there are occasions where they should be removed, considering that they could be on private residential property, or they are in a school or certain areas where it's not allowed, and of course we want to avoid any kind of lawsuits for Niantic. It's always going to create problems for us as players as well. So yeah, I do think that in certain circumstances, Pokéstops and Gyms should be moved or completely removed. But in this case, I'm not actually talking about that. I'm talking about legitimate Pokéstops that are not in private residential property, or they are Pokéstops that do actually exist and they are safe to access and everything like that. And I'm starting to hear about how some of these particular Pokéstops are starting to get removed, and I want to explore why. So the prevalent theory is that a lot of these legitimate Pokéstops are getting removed either because of false reporting, like malicious reporting from certain players who do not like certain communities, or they do not like certain players, so they try to get rid of their home gyms and their home Pokéstops or different things like that. But I actually think it has a lot more to do with the second theory that is going around, and that is of course because of AR mapping tasks and players incorrectly doing them, that Niantic is flagging Pokéstops falsely as non-existent or illegitimate and removing those Pokéstops. And I really think this is something that should be addressed and something that Niantic really needs to take into account for when it comes to AR mapping tasks. And then of course us as players need to be responsible with AR mapping tasks or just outright not do them. Now let's be real here, there really is no real motivation to do AR mapping tasks aside from helping out Niantic. Of course they are trying to eventually push out a feature that will allow us to have a much cooler experience with AR mode in Pokemon Go. Like, you will be able to eventually have your Pokemon interact with objects in the real world, and I actually think something like that would be really neat. And of course, in order for that to happen, Niantic is pushing out these AR mapping tasks so that within points of interest and Pokéstops, they can collect all of this data on how to actually map out objects in the real world and have Pokemon interact with them, which I can understand that some people were kind of upset about this, considering that it is somewhat free labor for Niantic. Like, us as players are basically being used without any sort of compensation, although I would kind of disagree with that, considering that they do occasionally give us premium items like Poffins and Incense. But I digress. I know players have a lot of mixed feelings regarding AR mapping tasks, but it's actually really concerning if Niantic is actually using AR mapping tasks to remove Pokéstops and Gyms, because that that should really not be a thing. I mean, yes, there's going to be Pokéstops and gyms that are located in private residential areas as well as in places where they really should not be accessed, so I can understand that Niantic does want to get rid of some of these illegitimate Pokéstops every now and then, but they really need to add different checks and balance systems and rewards for players who actually report these Pokéstops and different things like that. It's going to be really difficult for illegitimate Pokéstops to get removed because in a lot of areas, Pokéstops and gyms are actually bare. So, you know, a lot of players will try to hold on to as many Pokéstops that are available to them as they can, especially those that are illegitimate, because they do not want to see Pokéstops removed, considering that the amount of Pokéstops that they probably have in their neighborhoods are actually very limited. But if you give players an incentive to actually report these Pokéstops as opposed to them trying to do it themselves, I think could be a much better system. I mean, for one thing, maybe they could just ease off on restrictions. Like, yes, certain Pokéstops should not exist, especially those that are like in private residential areas or in gated communities, something like that. I could totally understand those, but maybe they could ease off on the restrictions on what is eligible as a Pokéstop. I really think this is something that they could explore, because having all of these Pokéstops removed when they shouldn't be is just really disheartening. But yeah, now I want to address the whole AR mapping thing. First and foremost, if you are actually doing these AR mapping tasks, I'm assuming it's most likely for those premium items. I honestly think that the better you do these tasks, the lower the risk that those Pokéstops and gyms will get removed. So if you are actually going out and doing AR mapping tasks for those Poffins, make sure you're actually stepping out of your car, make sure you're actually at the Pokéstop or gym, and make sure you're grabbing just a lot of good info to really show that the particular Pokéstop or gym is actually a legitimate Pokéstop. I can't stress this enough. There are plenty of times where I've actually noticed players just randomly waving their phone into the air trying to get the AR mapping task done for that Poffin. Honestly, the best thing you can do is to actually scan the object or point of interest that the Pokéstop or gym is highlighting. I mean, you got to think about it this way. If there is a playground, for example, and you're not actually scanning the playground, then they're going to think that the playground does not exist. So of course, you will want to give them the best data and the right data so that they are aware that these Pokéstops and gyms are actually legitimate. I mean, yes, there's going to be players out there who are going to do AR mapping tasks regardless, mainly because they just do not get enough Pokéballs from Pokéstops and gyms, so they want that nice little boost of Pokéballs, or if they are grinding out Buddy Adventure and they want to collect as many Poffins as they possibly can, there are different motivations for why someone would want to do AR mapping tasks. But in my opinion, if you do not need to do AR mapping tasks, then I would suggest not doing them at all, because you still run the risk of getting your Pokéstop or gym removed. Rather than increasing that risk, why not just not do those tasks and leave it up to players who are actually serious about it? Because the last thing I want to see is this becoming a huge controversy. Like, a lot of players work really hard with Niantic Wayfarer to get a whole bunch of Pokéstops and gyms for their neighborhoods, and it'd be really disheartening, it'd be really discouraging to see those Pokéstops removed. It would definitely discourage players from ever going into Niantic Wayfarer, and it would also make players just hate AR mapping tasks even more. So eventually, when that cool feature does get released, a lot of players will see it in a very negative way. And I'm pretty sure Niantic wants to prevent that, considering that the new AR feature could become a good source of revenue for them, so they do want to protect that as much as they can. And I really do think that when it comes to removing Pokéstops, even if they are legitimate, if it ends up being true that AR mapping tasks are the things that are removing these Pokéstops, they really should be done through player reporting. And of course, Niantic needs to give that incentive to players to actually report these invalid Pokéstops. I do not want to see them done through AR mapping tasks. That's basically my point. And the reason for that is, of course, because there's always going to be false positives, because people are not going to do these AR mapping tasks correctly. So I really do not think that AR mapping tasks should be a way for Niantic to remove Pokéstops. It just should not be. Anyway, these are just my thoughts and opinions regarding all this. Again, this is a lot of speculation and a lot of theories. I really do not know if Niantic is using AR mapping tasks to remove Pokéstops, but if they are, that is a big cause for concern, and I just wanted to address that in particular. But yeah, anyway, that's going to be it for this video. I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Did you have any of your Pokéstops removed because of AR mapping tasks or any other reason? Definitely share that down below. And yeah, let's have a great discussion. I am Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, and I'll catch you all later.